So, when we think of a global superpower, right, our minds usually jump straight to the obvious stuff, military bases strategically scattered around the globe, massive aircraft carriers, or just a booming, relentless domestic economy. But if we look past all that hardware and heavy industry, we're going to discover America's most invisible and yet absolutely potent source of power. It's not a weapon system. It's literally the physical greenbacks stuffed under mattresses from Buenos Aires to Beirut and the trillions more sitting quietly inside bank accounts all around the world.
Now you might be wondering, why does the entire world actually care so much about the US dollar? Seriously, why do foreign nations go out of their way to hoard massive reserves of dollars in their central bank vaults? And why are so many essential commodities, things like oil and wheat, priced in dollars regardless of who's actually buying or selling? Figuring this out is an absolute game changer. It's the key to understanding how Washington holds a level of influence that stretches far, far beyond its physical borders.
To put this into perspective, a staggering 88% of all global foreign exchange transactions happen in US dollars. Think about that for a second. When you consider the colossal volume of global trade happening every single day, the dollar is involved in the vast, vast majority of it. We're not just talking about a slight edge over the competition here. It's a monumental gap. This perfectly sets the stage for understanding this whole invisible engine. Because practically speaking, it's not just the money of America. It's the money of the world.
Let's jump right into Section 1, how the dollar became king.
Back in the 19th century, it was actually the British pound that ruled global trade. But as America grew into this absolute economic powerhouse, and as two world wars completely drained European economies, the global center of gravity shifted, big time. Then, in 1944, the Bretton Woods system officially crowned the dollar, tying it to gold, and then tying all other major currencies directly to the dollar. But here's where the story gets super fascinating. In 1971, the U.S. ended the dollar's convertibility into gold. A lot of people thought, well, that's it. The currency's going to collapse without that shiny metal backing. But instead, no way. It kept its global crown. It's a huge lesson, really. A currency doesn't strictly need gold backing to stay on top, as long as the global system is already deeply, deeply hooked on it.
Moving right along to Section 2, the global dollar network.
So what exactly is a reserve currency? Well, it's essentially just a massive amount of money held by central banks and major financial institutions to facilitate international investments, transactions, and pay off debt. But the really crucial takeaway here is that the dollar's true power doesn't just come from American policymakers declaring it important. No, it stems from absolute confidence, massive liquidity, and these incredible network effects. People use it because everyone else uses it, and more importantly, everyone trusts it.
Let's look at a real-world example. Imagine a company down in Brazil wants to buy some manufactured goods from Japan. They hit a snag almost immediately, right? The Brazilian company doesn't really want to hold Japanese yen, and the Japanese company has absolutely zero use for Brazilian reals. So what happens? The entire transaction is ultimately settled in US dollars. This pure convenience and universal trust brilliantly show exactly why companies and governments that are completely outside the US absolutely need access to dollars. It's the grease that makes global trade virtually frictionless.
Because of that, the dollar's footprint is literally everywhere. We're talking global trade invoicing, international banking, foreign exchange markets, U.S. Treasury securities, and central bank reserves. The point here is that the dollar's power isn't isolated to just one single place or one specific market. It's this deeply interconnected web. Each one of these pillars reinforces the others, which creates this massive self-sustaining loop of global demand. It makes it incredibly difficult for anyone to just opt out. Which brings us to Section 3, America's secret financial weapon.
Now, check this out. An immense 65% of all global debt is denominated in US dollars. That vastly outweighs all other currencies combined. It's crazy. And it shows exactly how deeply the world is tethered to the US financial system. Because think about it. When foreign nations or corporations borrow in dollars, they legally have to pay that debt back in dollars, which means year after year, they constantly need to acquire more dollars, permanently locking them into the American financial ecosystem.
And that lock-in has serious geopolitical impacts. Through mechanisms like correspondent banking, which is basically where foreign banks hold accounts at U.S. banks, and dollar clearing, U.S. authorities can implement intense sanctions and restrict financial access. By cutting foreign entities off from this dollar network, they effectively cut them off from participating in global trade altogether. Now, to be absolutely clear here, the U.S. can't literally just turn off another sovereign country's money completely, but the ability to severely pressure foreign governments and companies through these specific financial restrictions, that is a uniquely American power. Then there's the Federal Reserve.
Decisions made locally in Washington regarding domestic interest rates and capital flows can inadvertently dictate global financial conditions. It's wild, but the exact same rate hikes designed to cool down the local American housing market or affect your own mortgage can trigger massive shockwaves in emerging markets. When the Fed raises interest rates, the dollar generally gets much stronger, and suddenly it becomes immensely more expensive for those foreign nations to pay off all that dollar-denominated debt we were just talking about. It's a textbook example of how local American policy shifts economics thousands of miles away.
So as you can imagine, for countries dependent on this single currency, the costs of this dominance are very, very real. They face this frustrating global dependence on U.S. monetary policy that they get exactly zero vote in. They feel severe economic strain whenever the dollar gets strong. And recently, there are growing, serious concerns over the weaponization of financial sanctions, which has directly sparked a vocal push for a more multipolar financial system. Look, from the perspective of sovereign nations tied to a currency they don't control, these are completely valid concerns.
All right, that leads us into Section 4. Can the dollar be replaced?
We hear a lot about challenger nations like China and the broader BRICS coalition. And they do possess undeniable assets, right? Impressive economic size, brand new bilateral trade agreements that skip the dollar entirely, and massive central bank gold reserves. But simply having a huge economy isn't quite enough to unseat a global currency. They face some absolutely monumental structural hurdles. Things like ensuring capital market depth, maintaining absolute financial openness, building institutional trust, guaranteeing the rule of law, and providing just sheer unmatched liquidity. The reality is, the U.S. dollar has a century-long head start on building those deep structural foundations.
So if the dollar's dominance does actually start to wane, we're likely looking at three possible futures. First, the dollar simply overcomes these new challenges and remains the dominant force. Second, the world becomes financially multipolar, which would fundamentally shift global trade dynamics into distinct regional blocks. Or, third, several different currencies begin to share greater international influence, forcing emerging economies to navigate a highly fragmented, complicated system. Make no mistake, any of these shifts would trigger a massive historic realignment of global financial markets. Ultimately, money is power. But America's financial hegemony isn't just a giant printing press spitting out green paper. As we've seen in this explainer, it's a vast, invisible, and deeply entrenched ecosystem built on trust, global trade, legacy institutions, and immense network effects. It's a web built on convenience and unshakable reliability, just as much as it's built on pure economic size. So I'll leave you with this. If the dollar's dominance is one of America's greatest sources of global influence, what actually happens when the rest of the world successfully builds alternatives? It's a question that perfectly captures the fragility of those network effects we've been talking about. Because as the world evolves, so too will this invisible empire of money. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning how the world really works.